Hi, I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge, and welcome to Take It Easy on Yourself, 5 ways to stop your client self-blaming and take the pressure off their self-esteem. Now, sometimes you have to use shock to make a point, and sensing I'd get away with it, I said to my chronically self-blaming client, who I'll call Claire, I said to her, you know, there's a kind of greed in snatching all the blame. You and I have our fair share of responsibilities, but we shouldn't be grabbing too many pieces of the blame pie. Not when some of those pieces rightly belong to other people. It's a kind of theft. Why should you grab all the blame? It's just greedy. And you've got to understand, I said this with what I hoped was a sort of glint in my eye, somewhat jokey, and I had very good rapport with Claire at this point. But I noticed it had quite a profound effect on Claire. And for the first time, she laughed with me. Not a polite laugh like the ones that we'd had before in our initial meeting, but a genuine, heartfelt laugh. But, you know, it was a real connection, which was great because I had sort of been joking, but you can reframe a damaging idea through the medium of humour. It's a very powerful way to supply a reframe. So when her sort of chortling died down, she replied with her lovely Irish brogue, well, you know, no therapist has ever called me greedy before. You're not very politically correct, are you, Mark? And I could tell that my un-PC words had appealed to her. She was plain speaking, and I was as well. Then in mock seriousness, she said, gosh, Mark, you know, are therapists even allowed to say what you just said to me, to their clients? Isn't that victim blaming? And so I replied, you know, oh, and haven't you been victim blaming? And she laughed a little at that, you know, because obviously the victim she'd been blaming was herself. But she also looked very pensive and very went inward and really thought about what I'd said. So my reframe of excessive self-blaming being a form of greed had obviously cast the whole thing in a new light for her. And she said, and now I suppose I have to blame myself for being greedy. To which I replied, or you could just stop being greedy. And she laughed again, and I'll remember what you said, she said. You know, next time I'm being greedy, I'll remember exactly what you said in this session. Now, earlier in the session, Claire had been describing how she always blamed herself for everything. And she tended to take the blame for stuff that had nothing to do with her or little to do with her. She took the blame for her sister's marriage breakup, her son's laziness at university, her husband's dissatisfaction with his job. And she said, I immediately feel responsible for everyone. You know, when my neighbour got depressed, I immediately wondered, was I not good enough to her? Did I not listen to her enough? Was I not a good enough neighbour? Was I not helping her enough? I don't even watch the news, Claire said, because I feel like I should be doing more to change the world, but I don't know what to do. But I still feel personally responsible. I wasn't surprised when Claire told me she was prone to depression. And in fact, even as she spoke, she exhibited 3 common depressive thinking biases. So Martin Seligman, the so-called father of positive psychology, who was also the first to describe the phenomenon of learned helplessness, found that children who showed certain thinking styles in the way they explained events to themselves were much more prone to then developing depression. So the style in which we explain events to ourselves and circumstances to ourselves impacts on whether or not we are prone to depression. He also found that when he taught kids who were vulnerable to depression because of the way they responded to life to change their explanatory styles, they were much less likely to depress. They had new, more flexible ways of approaching reality. So just quickly, what are the explanatory styles that leave people at risk of sliding into depression? So first, those people prone to depression tend to globalize or generalize negative events, going from this specifically is bad to everything's bad. So, I failed my test in college, specific, to my whole life is crap, global. Second, they tend to stabilize or permanentize the negative in their mind, so it's long-lasting, and also in their language, so that the badness is felt as permanent, a fixed and therefore hopeless state of affairs. So they use words like never or ever or always when describing negative things. I've never been any good. Things will never get better. Nothing ever works out for me. But any positives are seen as temporary and fragile. Yes, my relationship is great at the moment, but what worries me is that it's too good to last. So the positive thing is seen as fragile and impermanent, but the negative thing is seen as strong and always going to be there, always been there. Third, people prone to depression have a tendency to blame themselves, to steal too much of the blame pie, or in psychological parlance, to internalize negatives. So this is part of the self-destructive thinking triad that we're looking at here. Blame isn't spread evenly. It's collected up and applied exclusively to oneself, as Claire was doing, stealing other people's pieces of blame pie, taking them all for herself. So for example, if a person prone to internalizing negatives and externalizing positives experiences a relationship breakup, which may have been the result of myriad factors outside of themselves, they'll tend to take the whole blame for that. The relationship ended because I screw up everything. So notice how this also manages to globalize the negative as well. It's not just relationships I screw up everything. People prone to internalizing negatives, like Claire was, also tend to externalize things that go well. So, yes, they agreed to go out with me. I asked someone out on a date and they said yes, but they're probably only doing that because they feel sorry for me. So it's to do with them being nice. It's not to do with me being attractive to them in some way. Or, yes, they said I did a good job at work, but they're just being kind. Okay, so you see the bias there. When stuff doesn't work, it's my fault exclusively. But when it does work, it was luck, or other people being nice, or other people being effective, or maybe it didn't really go well after all, but people just said it did. So that's the formula for low self-esteem, and is often part of the maintenance mechanism of depression. When those thinking styles start to shift and become more flexible, sometimes the depression may start to fall apart. It can't be maintained anymore. So my first suggestion for helping people overcome excessive blame is get used to generating other possibilities for stuff. So we leap to conclusions and concoct assumptions almost before what happens even happens. This proves I'm stupid or wicked or weak, or I'm just a bad person, and this proves it. I'm rotten to the core. I'm a loser. I always suspected I was, but this proves it. This is absolute proof that I'm a complete loser. Why else would my co-worker not seem to acknowledge me when I smiled at her this morning? So in the blink of a self-blaming eye, our feelings are confirmed by what we think about something, because we've assigned a meaning, an explanation for something that's perhaps a bit ambiguous, that we don't really know the meaning for. And if you feel responsible for everything, then other people's failings become your failings. If you don't let other people have problems in life, then you're denying them an important part of their life. But we can teach our clients to get creative with their explanations for things. Okay, so why else? What other reasons, other than you being a faulty product of nature, might there be for this event or this situation? And there's a kind of inverse hubris in feeling that everything is about you and your terribleness. It's as though people feel the world revolves around them, but without the conceit and arrogance and narcissism that normally tracks alongside those kinds of perceptions. So if you're blaming yourself for everything, you're making yourself the center of things when you don't need to. And I actually jokingly said that to Claire. I said, I did have very good rapport with her. And I said, it's not always about you, And she laughed at that, but I wasn't really joking. She told me that she felt terrible because her son spent his time partying but not studying. And I asked her to generate 3 possible reasons unrelated to her defectiveness or perceived defectiveness and her lack of encouragement, as she thought, as to why he might not be studying. What other reasons might there be? And she started to generate some alternative non-self-blaming potential reasons. Maybe he's surrounded by other people who party all the time, so maybe he's just going along with the crowd, okay, she said. Or maybe it's his way of coping with being away from home for the first time. It's not my lack of encouragement, maybe it's his way of coping. Or maybe he's just finally letting his hair down and actually having some fun and relaxing and enjoying the fact that he's just 18 years old. So Claire also acknowledged that, in fact, she had and did encourage him to study. So she'd done her bit, she'd taken her responsibility, and she didn't have to take all these pieces of the blame pie, some of which probably belonged to her son. I asked Claire to generate 3 possible external reasons why her husband might not like his job and why her sister's marriage had ended, which didn't have to do with her taking too much of the blame pie. I suggested that these possible causes might not be right, but they might be right. Okay. So you can ask your client to engage in thought experiments. If someone says hello to a co-worker at work, and they usually they're friendly, but the co-worker blanks them, what are some possible causes for this which don't lead to the assumption that your client did something wrong to upset them, or they don't like them anymore, or this sort of thing? So they can use their creativity to fill in the gaps as to possible non-self-blaming reasons. Martin Seligman carried out many thought experiments like this with children at risk of developing depression, and found that helping them loosen up their thinking had a kind of inoculation effect. Helping the children understand the depressive thinking styles, the explanatory styles, and see through them and see them from the outside and challenge them, inoculated the children from depression. But like any skill, the more this is practiced, the better your clients will get at generating multiple possible causes for events they would have previously exclusively blamed on themselves. So people who self-blame excessively discount, ignore, or fail to see the role of other people in those events, and we need to teach them to overcome this bias. Secondly, they can share the blame fairly and don't even think of it as blame, but perhaps responsibility. So I'd repeatedly ask Claire what responsibility other people had for a situation. What part did they play in the situation? So if someone mugs me, I might blame myself for walking in the wrong part of town at the wrong part of the day or night, or for wearing a flashy watch and so on. And that might be part of it. That might be part of the responsibility pie. But ultimately, perhaps the mugger themselves should take a bigger slice of the blame pie. Did Claire's sister and her husband play any part in their own marriage breakdown? Or was it all down to Claire? Was it simply that Claire hadn't always welcomed her former brother-in-law into her home because she, quite rightly by the sound of it, didn't trust him? Was it just Claire's fault? Could Claire be generous in sharing out the responsibility pie? So I stopped calling it the blame pie and I started calling it the responsibility pie. Okay, and to even visualize those pieces and giving them to other people. I asked her facetiously whether anyone else had been in her sister's marriage other than just Claire, and she found that quite funny as well, but she got the point. I asked her to practice sharing out the pie when thinking about all the things in her life that she felt largely or unreasonably responsible for. Next, we can consider how people see themselves and what they expect from life. So we can examine client assumptions and expectations. Now, it's important to understand that expectations shape life experience. We can only be disappointed or shocked or surprised if we were expecting something else. So the feeling of disappointment, for example, is a real opportunity for self-knowledge. If you're disappointed by something, you can stop and think, this is interesting, I can learn something about myself. What were my assumptions about this situation? What was I expecting? When people disappoint themselves or are disappointed by other people, we can ask them, what exactly was your expectation? And the answer to that question tells us how the person feels life should be. It tells us something very important about that person's assumptions or biases. Sometimes we all need to relax our expectations to see what's actually there in reality. And to do that, we may need to be calm and also examine our own expectations. What do your clients expect from themselves? And what do they expect from other people? Are these expectations reasonable? Continual disappointment in oneself or others, or gratitude for any crumb of decency from other people, may tell us more about what we're like than what other people are like. So I asked Claire what she felt she should be like. And she said, well, I like to do things perfectly. I like to do a really good job. And she said, I do have very high standards for myself. Now that's wonderful, but maladaptive perfectionism can cause real problems. It can certainly be a risk factor for depression. But it seems that Claire only had these rigid expectations of herself, not of other people. So it was just her. And in fact, she had low expectations of other people and didn't expect them to make so much effort as she expected herself to make in situations. So if a mutual endeavor didn't work out the way that she decided it should work out, she'd take it exclusively upon her own head. You know, it's my fault, not our fault. So again, she wasn't sharing the responsibility pie. So we can help our clients by examining their expectations and also working to loosen them up a little. Now, when clients excessively self-blame, we can also explore with them what their intentions had been. Did they want things to go wrong, or did they have the best of intentions? Okay. Claire had studied mythology. So when she was in trance, I spoke to her about the Greek gods. And they were gods, yet they still had weaknesses, foibles, and personal failings, just like human beings. And without this human side, without their human issues, they would have been totally unrelatable and disconnected from the human world. So the Greek gods really appealed to the ancient Greek population because of their weaknesses. And I suggested Claire might have some goddess-like qualities herself, but surely she wanted to be human as well. So helping our clients observe and relax their own expectations links to my next tip, and in fact it enables the next tip. So number 4, help your client become less sure of themselves. Now, we human beings love simple causes for stuff. And if that obvious cause doesn't immediately manifest, we sometimes fill that meaning vacuum with imagination. So we make stuff up and we believe it. We make believe. It's a great paradox that those with low self-esteem, or those tending to self-blame themselves, will often have low self-esteem, are extremely sure of themselves. And that sounds paradoxical because that's the opposite of what we often assume. So your job is to rock that surety, loosen it up a bit. So someone hasn't texted back and it's been all of 30 seconds. I don't know why they haven't texted back. So I make up a reason. They don't like me anymore. I've upset them. They got angry with me because of what I said last week in the bar, or whatever. And then because my fantasy is quite realistic, I start to believe it. And of course, the fantasy might be right, but it might not be. Point is, I don't know. I don't have enough information. I'm just referencing my own imagination. But if you must imagine relaxing with not knowing. Imagine being able to hold a meaning vacuum in your mind until actual, real information comes to fill that vacuum. The point is, so much of life is ambiguous. So if we can help our clients resist filling the meaning vacuum with imagination and instead let it sit empty for a while until real knowledge comes to fill it. So they haven't texted back. I don't know why they haven't. I don't have to assign a meaning. Psychotherapists call this skill of relaxing with not knowing tolerating ambiguity. So the toleration of ambiguity in life is a key mental health skill. I don't know why my co-worker seemed to snub me this morning. Maybe they were distracted by worries. Maybe they're really tired. Maybe they were angry with someone else or at themselves for something. Or maybe I just don't know yet. So the first step is generating other possible factors which don't necessarily have to do with your client. And then we can teach them to be cool with not knowing sometimes and not having to fill that meaning vacuum with make-believe, tolerating ambiguity and even relaxing with it. And in order to relax with uncertainty, to just wait for reality to do its thing and to provide you with more information about something, we need to relax in general. And I'll come to that in point 5. But we can certainly talk to our clients about meaning vacuums and not prematurely filling them with fantasy. Claire had never thought about it like that before, and she found it really useful. She was a good learner and she really thought about meaning vacuums. And now we could all learn to hold them a bit more so we don't just assume stuff all the time or blame ourselves prematurely. She loved to do things well and she wanted to master the skill of being cool with not having to know the meaning of something too soon. So number 5, we can soothe the feelings so that thoughts behave themselves. Now it's amazing what people feel they can or should be able to control, and also what they can't possibly influence. And getting these assumptions wrong has major effects on people's lives. For example, some people think they should be 100% responsible for whether someone else is happy or not. Okay, it's all down to me whether you're in a good mood or not, you know. It might be slightly down to me, but it's certainly not 100% down to me. One client I knew organised a picnic for her family on a day the weather forecast had predicted to be good, but it rained, and she had guests and family from far afield, and she'd organised this picnic, and she still ruminated about her stupidity of organising this picnic years later. She was to blame for the capricious wiles of the British weather, and it was all her fault. Others feel they can't control what they could have more control over, such as their own feelings. You know, so you hear people saying things like, I hope I don't cry during the meeting or lose it or, you know, get angry during that conversation. Understanding our clients' locus of control can be really important. So to what extent do they feel they do or should or can or can't control different things in their lives? So I asked Claire about specific times in which she blamed herself excessively for something. And she told me that whenever she saw her son's social media updates in which he joked about not having done any work at university, she would feel as though she was failing him. And I taught her to relax deeply using clinical hypnosis and to experience seeing updates like that on his social media feeds and feeling calm and open and recognizing his major part to play in him not working, but her relaxing with that too, almost as if she could visualize giving him his piece of the responsibility pie. If we don't let people have their own problems, we don't let them have their own lives. Feeling we have to solve everyone's problems can be seen as a form of devouring other people's independence, a form of theft. And that idea really struck strongly with Claire. So yes, I know that sounds strong, but it's a point worth considering. Sometimes we need to learn to set boundaries with other people, but sometimes we also need to learn to set boundaries with ourselves. Troublesome thoughts tend to come from troublesome feelings, which is kind of the opposite to the classical cognitive psychology model, which had us believe that all your feelings are produced by the thought, and if you change your thought, the feeling changes. But it's also as true to say that feelings determine what you think. So we can work with our clients to directly calm and relax their feelings around issues of self-blame, and that's what I did with Claire. This isn't about letting people off the hook when they do actually have some responsibility, but just more evenly and objectively seeing where true responsibility lies. So indeed, we've seen the dangers of never taking responsibility or always blaming other people without taking personal responsibility. And that can be, of course, just as bad. You get people who blame the government or their parents or their peers for everything that goes wrong and don't take responsibility at all for themselves. But chronic self-blamers are not really people who are ever likely to go to that other extreme. And Claire told me she was happy to let go of that greediness. And at that point I knew that my rather strange reframe had taken root and actually helped her. Because tyranny is tyranny, even when it's self-imposed. So I hope you found that useful, and if you did, please hit like and subscribe. And if you want to hear when my next video is published, hit the notification bell below this video. I'm Mark Tyrrell of Uncommon Knowledge, and if you'd like to subscribe to my email newsletter, you can find it over at unk.com/blog. That's unk.com/blog, and thanks for watching.